Brothers and sisters, Mr. Tim Boyd was born in New York City and lived there for 17 years until he left to attend Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. From there, he transferred to the University of Chicago, where he was an honors graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Affairs. He joined the Theosophical Society in America in 1974. Along with some Theosophists, he founded a Theosophical spiritual community in Chicago's inner city. The group held classes on the ageless wisdom, meditation, and healing. They worked with at-risk and disadvantaged youth, transformed vacant lots of land into award-winning organic food gardens, and placed beehives on the roofs of local buildings. The group formed a business called Royal Associates that initially focused on reclaiming and renovating deteriorating residential buildings in their area, something he's still doing in Adyar, and creating housing for low and middle income families. Their work helps stabilize neighborhoods through the training and employment of local youth and the creation of affordable homes for area residents. They were indeed royal servers of people. This was proof of his innovativeness and ability to shape the organization he heads. His other great ability is to be able to speak on any subject of theosophy at any time in the simplest language which everyone can understand. Tim became a national lecturer for the TS in America in 1988, the president of the TOS in 2007, and the president of TS in America in 2011. Tim's involvement with the TOS and the Chushul orphanage in Tibet led to an audience with the Dalai Lama, which resulted in the TS in America sponsoring his famous visit to Chicago in July of 2011, a two-day event attended by 10,000 people. The event raised 400,000 US dollars, all of which was donated to educational projects aiding Tibetan communities worldwide. In 2014, Tim was re-elected as president of TS in America and later also elected as president of the Theosophical Society. He currently shares his time between Adyar and his new Chicago residence, where he lives with his wife, Lily, and daughter, Angelique. Our president, Mr. Tim Boyd.
Well, I'd like to thank Pradeep for his wonderful introduction. I'm not going to go over again my what had become a sort of rehearsed commentary on my similarity to Barack Obama. But I will say that I am his elder, so any similarities are him to me. I should say one further similarity. He has a highly involved, highly evolved wife named Michelle. And I think we're in competition there too, because I have Lily. So in any event, all of those things are, I'm thankful to Pradeep. I should say too, whenever I hear about this experience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, all of the things that went into that, and the end result being that everything that was raised, we so happily gave away. It wasn't required, but we determined from the very beginning that every penny that came from this would go to aid the Tibetan community in exile, particularly for educational projects that His Holiness designated. But I have to say, one of the great experiences of my life, and I think it's a job, if such a job existed, I would happily do this job every day, My feeling for it occurred when the time came to give away $400,000. To give a check for $400,000 is such a wonderful experience. I mean, I could do that every day. But nobody has asked me to do that. But anyway, as always, I am very, very happy and continually honored to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with brothers, sisters, friends at this occasion. It's something that does my heart good, and I hope that there's some communication that takes place from me to you. Obviously, I'm going to be speaking, and one of the things about speaking, we talk about a lot of different things, but I can tell you from the outset, if our time together is effective, you will not be hearing anything new from me. Which is to say, if our time is effective, the outcome of our time together will be simply that perhaps you will have the opportunity to remember, to reconnect with a resident truth that's within all of us. If we're successful in that during our time together, we will also be a blessing to the world around us. What I want to talk about tonight, obviously the theme for this convention relates to the altruistic heart. I want to talk about the heart. Really, I want to talk about wisdom, which is a subject that I think perhaps definitely we dimly understand. But wisdom and the pathway that has been indicated by wise people, by sages, by saints throughout the generation, that pathway being the heart. So we'll go into that during our brief time together this evening. So just maybe to begin with, we should probably get a little bit of a handle on terminology. First of all, I should tell you, I'm not going to be overwhelming you with terminology from any language but basic English. Part of my self-training in speaking to people, when she was much younger, my daughter used to like to come to talks that I would be giving at the Theosophical Societies in different places when she was young. At first, I think she liked to come because when I would be speaking, I would always make some reference to her. And, after the talk, she would say, "Oh, Dad, why are you talking about me?" I say, "Okay, I get it." And so one time I did not talk about her. Immediately after the lecture, "Dad, you didn't talk about me." But what it was this. After I would talk, I would ask her, what do you understand? And what did you think I was talking about? And I found that if I could present these ideas in such a manner that it could be understood by a 12-year-old, this was my target. Because we can step it up or we can step it down, but if I can speak to the mind and the heart of a 12-year-old, that's good enough for me. So, simple terms is what you'll hear from me this evening, and hopefully in a way that will be comprehensible to you. Wisdom. There are all of these different terms that we find are interchangeable, incorrectly so. When we get to be very loose with our thinking, sometimes we find that information, knowledge, wisdom, sometimes the line between these terms blurs. I mean, one of the facts of the time in which we live right now, this is a Google fact if you want to look it up, is that they speak about this as an information age. So in a sense, what they're talking about is the exponential increase of information, of data. So there are various ways that they put it, but they would say that every 13 months, the total sum of human information doubles. And this keeps on accelerating. Obviously, it's not something where anybody has the capacity to grasp it. But you'll also find in the same sentence the people substituting knowledge for information. The two are not the same. Information is a basic building block. It's a fact. Knowledge is something that is structured out of these facts. It's a fact that this shirt is blue. So what? That's not knowledge. Knowledge comes when we apply a number of these other facts and build some sort of structure that gives meaning to these various building blocks. So there's information, there's knowledge. And very often, we, even as theosophists, are somehow of the opinion that this next step toward wisdom is really just the amassing of, certain quanta of knowledge. That after you've read the correct books and, the necessary poundage of them, then somehow or another, at some undefinable line, then you become wise. Of course, you also have to be old. You must be gray. So, I have the potential of being wise. I've read enough. I'm gray enough. Maybe he's wise. But these things they don't go together. Knowledge is something of wisdom is something of a completely different order from anything of the nature of knowledge or information. Wisdom is the perception of reality, the seeing of that which is, undiluted by the various sorts of illusions, by the various sorts of mayas, we could say, that we embrace, unfiltered by the host of identities which we claim for ourselves, of nationality, of gender, of race, of religion, all of these filters which dim the light of wisdom to the point that it's almost inaccessible to us from moment to moment, ever present, but as a normal rule, inaccessible. So when we speak about wisdom, we're talking about a different order of things. So when we talk about the heart, in normal parlance, normal speech, if you look at the music that we listen to, and this is anywhere in the world, the movies, the songs, the literature, it's filled with references to the heart. Actually, just today, I received an email from the United States, and it began with, "It is with a heavy heart." And when you read that, you know someone's passed on. I don't even need to go any farther. It is with a heavy heart. But we talk about people who are cold-hearted, people who are warm-hearted, people who are open-hearted, closed-hearted. We talk about people who do things wholeheartedly. And then we talk about lazy people who do things half-heartedly. Everywhere, our language is permeated with references to the heart. I mean, you can't go a day without referring to something related to the heart. This is at a superficial level, but in some ways, the territory of human exploration at this time seems to be this challenging area of the heart. So that's just in normal conversation. And as far as I can tell, I have been blessed, and sometimes I think maybe it's cursed, with traveling extensively these days, fairly extensively. And I can say from my experience, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in India, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in Europe, all of these references to the heart are the same. So that's at a normal level. At deeper levels, we also have references to the heart. So in the Bible, there is this phrase that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. In theosophical terms, we speak about the doctrine of the heart. In Mahayana Buddhism, there is this ever-present mantra, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, also known as the Heart Sutra. So everywhere we look, at superficial levels and at ever-deepening levels, there is this focus on the primacy of the heart. And so it's something that we should point our attention toward. As we go along this evening, I'm hopeful that perhaps we will actually walk out of this place with some sort of focus that we can either initiate or strengthen on our own behalf. I was, not too very long ago, I was listening to a talk. It was a talk that was given in 1965, and it was given by past president of the TS, Brother N. Sri Ram. And he was talking about the modern world in 1965. And of course, Sri Ram, being the utterly brilliant individual that he was, focused on it at a depth that I will not be able to paraphrase. But some of the features of what he spoke about, I think, are worth considering. One of the things he talked about was this fact that we're all aware of, when we actually give it some thought, that currently the influence of the progression of science pervades our lives in ways that we perhaps are not even mindful of. Science, by its very nature and in the time that it has had to develop over time, really has looked into every physical phenomenon that has come before it. Now, whether we're talking about the scope of the physical universe, whether we're talking about the minutiae of the atom, whether we're talking about the biological world, the endocrinological world, the neurological world, it has all been researched. And there is information, and there are descriptions related to every phenomenon within this, every phenomenon that they are aware of, within the physical realm. I mean, we have to be very clear, it's something related to the physical realm. Similarly, the explosion of the deepening awareness that science has brought has also produced a host of technologies. Again, I'm paraphrasing Sri Ram and the technologies that he spoke about in 1965. So there is this technological impulse that has taken place. And part of the thing he spoke about then was that because of the new opportunities for global communication, one of the things that he was witnessing was that these global organizations are forming. Organizations which previously could not exist because there was no way to communicate globally. But organizations which, by their very nature, seek yours and my attention. Try to place claims on your resources of various types, whether they're selling something to you as a product or selling something to you as an idea or their particular ideal. These things have become propagated. And we find ourselves living in this world of competing organizations, each competing for our attention, for our mind. Many years ago, right around the time of the founding of the Theosophical Society, a little bit before, the great American transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson made the very perceptive observation. He said that society everywhere is in conspiracy against every one of its members. That the virtue which is most in demand is conformity. And that in the end, nothing is more sacred than the integrity of your mind. That hasn't changed. If anything, it has intensified. One of the other things Sri Ram spoke about was that as a result of these many things, the movement that takes place within human society has increased. Let's fast forward now 50 years from Sri Ram's analysis to now. Has there been a change? If anything, the change has been that it has intensified. The technologies that are available are much more broad, connecting us to information sources and people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was in New York for Christmas with my mother. And in New York, you travel by riding the subway trains. And it's fascinating to me because you get on the train and you just look around at the people who are there with you. And, it's probably not something that would stand up to scientific scrutiny, but my little observation, it's about 7 to 8 out of 10 people on every car of the train that are some way hooked to a screen. They're either playing a game on it, reading it, or have the earphones plugged into it, listening. The screen and the device, this technology is continually at play within the normal population of people. And I'm not complaining, I have an iPhone. Just got myself a new one. But this is a fact. One of the other features, probably, maybe one or two of you may be aware of one of those once-in-a-lifetime events that occurred during your own lifetime. A monumental event that probably went almost completely unreported in 2008, when for the very first time in human history, the world became more than 50% urban, and it's increasing at a very fast rate. More than half of the people in the world live in cities like Chennai, New York, Mumbai, Delhi, Lisbon. The world has urbanized, and it's on a track to continue at a very fast rate. So the condensation, the concentration of people within each other's presence in close proximity has increased. So the time that is available, the opportunities that are available to rest in your own aura, in your own environment, it is challenging to create that time and almost impossible to find it without personal effort within the normal situations which we inhabit. Furthermore, the idea of movement, obviously travel is a worldwide phenomenon now. Used to be when I was younger, we lived in New York City, and my mother and father's family were in California. So when we would go to visit them over the summer, every now and then my father would drive all the way across country, 3,000 miles. It was wonderful as kids. But then also on a couple of occasions, we flew. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but it will give you some idea because it was in propeller planes. And the stewardesses, not the flight attendants, the stewardesses were all dressed in uniforms and skirts, and they all had to be very young and very pretty. That was the day. But you would get on the plane at night in order to arrive sometime the next morning. Who would put up with that now? But also, you would get on the plane, and when you get on the plane, you'd have on, as a little kid, you'd have on a little suit and tie, because this was a very special and unusual thing to be flying. And of course now, people come in flip-flops and pajamas, because everybody flies. There's nothing unusual about it. But the movement of human populations, the 25th largest nation in the world, is a nation that has no country. It is that grouping of people who are refugees, who are immigrants, who are on the move, footloose, fancy-free, homeless. Their numbers comprise the largest moving group of people in the world, larger than the next 175 nations. That's the time we're living. And movement also, we give it little consideration. Before these talks, people say, turn off your cell phone. But part of the movement is that the ether in which we sit is populated with streaming energies of human creation. Just turn your cell phones on and it's going to ring. Right in this room, all of those waves are passing through the bodies of each and every one of us. Human created. So part of the condition of modernity is in part a continuous exposure to non-stable energy patterns. Nature, one of the reasons why it is resourcing is because it has stability. It is cyclical. It is regulated. So people go to nature to resource. Human energy patterns are necessarily erratic. They say one of the greatest inventions of all time was the light bulb. It makes it possible for us to have a meeting this evening, but it also completely has disrupted the cycles, the circadian cycles that have been the pattern forever. So this is a description of modernity. This is the condition that we have. So while the great sages remind us about the primacy of the heart, we find ourselves in a time when our existence is somewhat dictated by the limits of the intellect and the organ of its use, the brain. That tends to be where we're focused. One of the things that was said early in the Theosophical Society's history, it was in one of the Mahatma letters from Mahatma K.H. And the point was made about the Theosophical Society and the ageless wisdom's relationship to science. We say religion, science, and philosophy are those primary avenues of human search for truth that our second object embraces. But we have had sort of a funny relationship with science. HPB in the early days found herself continually having to correct, modify these limited and limiting assertions that tried to condense human knowledge and human existence to the physical plane. and the misunderstandings that she felt it generated related to the ageless wisdom, which looked at a much broader picture. But what the Mahatma K.H. said was that modern science is our best ally. Modern science is our best ally, was the statement. And I think the idea behind that being that science by its very nature is necessarily progressive. Everything that has been understood at one point will be expanded upon and perhaps even discarded at another point. It progresses. And so the natural arc of this approach to studying the universe was assumed that it would come to verge on matters of the inner life, come to verge on the spiritual dimension of being. And so I think it has been with great anticipation that many of us, many theosophists, have looked at the progression of scientific thought and scientific study. And so as this most tested of all fields ever in science, quantum mechanics, has matured, I think many of us have looked to that as this best ally in terms of focusing the popular understanding of the inner life. Quantum physics, some of the innately theosophical ideas that we find in this particular approach to science are such things as non-locality. So the idea that electrons that have been in association with each other, they could be thousands of miles apart, and what affects one immediately affects the other. To us, this is Theosophy 101 in many ways. The idea that thoughts are things, that they are not encumbered by space or time. The obvious experience of anybody to become aware of the sufferings of a loved one who's far away, without hearing about it, without seeing the person, but knowing, feeling what they feel at a distance, non-locality. Normal experience, but an idea that is one of the bedrock ideas of this quantum physics. The idea of discontinuity, or what's more popularly known as the quantum leap. Anyone who has had any sort of experience of a deeper awakening probably recognizes that it occurs in much the same way as this electron takes its leap from one orbit to another. When a certain quantum of energy is radiated into an electron, it jumps to a new orbit. And the normal way of thinking is that it would gradually travel from one place to another, but quantum physics has demonstrated there is no passing in between. It's one place, then there's a quantum leap to the next. Anyone who has been graced with some level of mystical encounter can attest to this spiritual aspect that is described by this quantum physics. So there has been great, I think, anticipation that this aspect of science was the ally that we have been looking for. I think, unfortunately, perhaps at this point, it's not the one that is, it's not a theosophical expression, but it's not the one that is bringing home the bacon. It's an American expression. The one that is bringing in this new age. Because I think it's first of all, it's not completely equally understood among the scientists themselves, and certainly not among those who are not scientifically inclined. But I think probably this best ally within science has come from a very unexpected direction. And it is, in fact, something that probably indirectly is having a profound effect on the appreciation of these deeper ideas that theosophy brings. And it comes out of the realm of medical science. Not that medical science has traced the outlines of the Akasha or the inner worlds, no. But what has happened is this. In 1961, 50% of the deaths, 50% of the people who died in the United Kingdom died of heart attacks in 1961. If you had a heart attack in 1961 in any hospital around the world, you'd be brought in and put in with the general population, and the best thing they could do for you is give you some painkillers, and generally you died, or you didn't do too well. That was where it was at that time. 1976, research demonstrated that the cause of these cardiac arrests, these heart attacks, was the fact that there were clots of blood blocking the flow of blood in the arteries that produced, when the flow of blood stopped, life stopped. So from that research, in 1977, the very first heart surgery was performed to remove these clots. By the late 1980s, they had developed clot-dissolving drugs as well. So the result of it was this, that people who ordinarily would have died did not. But more than that, at least a couple of decades ago, the definition of death was you're dead when your heart stops beating. But suddenly, they were able to bring you back to life after the heart stopped beating. And what it resulted in was this explosion in the number of people who had these things that have been described as near-death experiences, NDEs. It's a whole field of study at this point. And one of the defining features, I should say too, that these NDEs, these near-death experiences, it was not something that only happened to construction workers. It wasn't something that was confined to one gender or another. It wasn't something that affected college graduates more than high school graduates, more than people who had never been to school. It was very democratic. So, across the spectrum, there were people who were having and then reporting their experiences of conscious existence completely removed from and apart from the body. That life consciousness was not in any way dependent upon the physical vehicle that it inhabited. So, what does this do? The general characteristics, when people who have had these experiences, and there are all kinds of estimates about how many people have had them now. Some estimates I have heard go as high as 1 in every 8 people. Certainly if it's 1 in every 8 people, there are many of you out here tonight who could attest to what I'm saying now. But the features that they found in common with this experience were, first of all, an awareness of being out of the body. Many people could actually look back and see the body laying on the table and report about what the doctors were saying. Common experience. Next thing, there was this experience of going through a tunnel or up a staircase, going toward a light, an experience of meeting with beings of light, deceased loved ones. These are the ones that are characteristic of the host of these experiences. There is the experience of finding yourself bathed in an intense and unconditional love. Then there is always the life review and the imparting of knowledge about yourself and about the universe. And then you come back. Often people talk about coming back quite reluctantly, that where they were, they really didn't want to leave. But for whatever reason, they had to come back. And so what this has done is this. Part of the after effect of this experience, that now is the experience of millions of people around the world, is you notice that they come back and they have a sense of purpose. There is a sense of a capacity for a self-effacing love that perhaps was not there before. Compassion, appreciation for life. All of these qualities that if we talk about the higher dimensions of the heart, these are the very qualities that are spoken of by the great spiritual teachers throughout history. That in some way, the higher reaches of the heart are experienced in this absence from the blinding influence of obsession with the body. HPB made the statement about the experience of the spiritual. How do you experience the spiritual? And what she commented, well, she probably said many things, but one of the things that she said is, in order to experience genuine spiritual life, you must paralyze the personality. A strong language. The personality must be paralyzed. The veiling, blocking influence of our constant desiring mind, of the sensations that we're ever in search of the body with its aches and pains and demands, has to be paralyzed, was her language. And I think there probably is no stronger paralysis than dying. You don't get more paralyzed. That personality doesn't get much more paralyzed than that. And so this experience of a, certainly minimally, a hint of a deeper spirituality is something that becomes available. And countless people now have had this experience. And so when you hear someone talk about that, even if that's not something that is your experience, minimally, it plants a certain seed of doubt. Doubt about the firmness of this reality that people insist upon us accepting. The idea that this is a physical world with physical objects, that consciousness is somehow generated by the physical organ, the brain, it starts to become a little bit doubtful. And it's ridiculous to anybody who has had the experience. So this is something where science, modern science, has certainly become a huge ally, but in an indirect fashion. So part of the, statements about the heart, not just HPB, but it's come down to us through countless sources, but in no uncertain terms, H.P. Blavatsky said that the heart is the center of spiritual consciousness. She said there were three centers in the body: the navel, which was the center of the desire nature, the brain, which was the center of the psychic or the psychic nature, and the heart, which is the center of the spiritual consciousness. Now, what heart is it that she's talking about? I mean, it's very easy to think that this beating, pumping heart is that heart. But it is not, or I should say it is, but it is not. I mean, Jonathan Colbert made mention of the Gayatri prayer, the prayer that relates to the solar consciousness. And, part of that prayer, I think it was William Quan Judge who did the translation that talked about the prayer being to that solar nature that is hidden by the disk of light. So the sun that we see that gives life to all physical organisms is just the covering of this deeper sun. In a similar way, the heart that we are familiar with is the organ, it's the covering of a deeper heart, but it still has its connection. And so I find it quite interesting. I mean, they've set up experiments, one which fascinates me. There's an institute out in California, and these studies have been replicated many places, called the Heart Math Institute, a fellow by the name of Dr. Roland McCraty. And so they did an experiment, which I love to recount. I may have even said it here at some point, but I'm going to say it again. The experiment they did was this. They took a computer and programmed it to present photographs randomly. There was no way to tell what photograph would come up next. And they had people who were going to participate in the study, and they took the wires and connected them so that they could have readings on their heart and on their brainwave activity. And so what they were looking for in the heart is something they call coherence, so heart rate variability. And so Dr. McCraty, in describing his experiment, he said the types of pictures they chose were two different types. One was pictures of lovely natural scenes, of kittens, of little puppies, of pretty little babies smiling, that sort of thing. Something that would just generate that kind of warm and fuzzy feeling. The other photos he took were images from battle in war, car accidents. He said he tried to make it just as graphic as possible without just completely making somebody go unconscious from seeing it. And then these photos would, when the person was wired up, the photos would just pop up. And then they would measure the reaction of the brain and of the heart. So here's what he found. That when the photo of whichever category was coming up, that just a slight moment before the picture came up, the brain was responding in the way that you would anticipate for that picture. So a little bit before the picture was presented. But that the heart was responding almost 5 seconds before it was even presented, it was responding in the appropriate way for those photos. The heart, the awareness of the heart, it intuited. It was the organ that reflected the intuition long before the picture even appeared. So, scientific sort of approach to this age-old teaching that the heart is the center of the spiritual consciousness. I think perhaps at this point, what I'd like to do, I'm not going to hold you much longer, but I would like to perhaps wind our time up together with some quotes about the heart and something that actually we might even be able to apply about this heart. All of these quotes that I'll be sharing with you are drawn from either HPB or one of the Mahatmas. The quotes that I'm going to be sharing are from her collected writings. She says, "The heart is the abode of the spiritual man, whereas the psycho-intellectual man dwells in the head with its 7 gateways. In the heart is a spot which is the last to die, a spot marked by a tiny violet light." This is also consistent with, particularly with Tibetan Buddhist practice, that the white drop and the red drop of the vitalizing principle center in the heart. Everything else fades away. That remains at the end. The heart is the center of the spiritual consciousness, as the brain is the center of intellectual consciousness. But the spiritual consciousness cannot be guided by a person, nor can its energy be directed by him until he is completely united with his higher self. Buddhi manas is the word that she used. Until then, it guides him if it can. That is to say, it makes efforts to reach him and to impress the lower consciousness. Those efforts are helped by his own growth in purity. The effort, however, and this is the part that I think where we get to the part where we can think in terms of what do we take away. I mean, hopefully you have enjoyed listening to what has been said, but that's very nice. But what do you do when it's not being said anymore? Therapeutics of speech. So the effort should be continually made to center the consciousness in the heart. So by continually would be meant even now as we sit, to locate in yourselves that thing which you would regard as your heart center, and to center your consciousness in that center, and to listen for the promptings of the spiritual consciousness. So obviously it requires a certain level of concentration at first, so that the still small voice of the spiritual consciousness, it is protected from being drowned out by all the very heavy noises that surround us, some of the heaviest being our own thoughts. Listen for the promptings of the spiritual consciousness, for though success will be far off, you're not going to succeed tonight. But if you don't start, you never will. Though it may be far off, a beginning must be made and the path opened up. And then she gives a very specific practice that you can engage in terms of meditative practice. And it's something that I think is much better suited for someone who has a theosophical background. So, with regard to concentration, she writes that the Blessed Master Kutumi writes, and then this is what he writes: your best method is to concentrate on the Master as a living man within you. Concentrate on the Master as a living presence within you. Make his image in your heart and a focus of concentration so as to lose all sense of bodily existence in that one thought. To become so absorbed in the presence of this living Master in the heart that becomes something that is undisturbed within us. This is the advice of the Blessed Kutumi, as she describes it. So that's something that I would like for you to take away from our time together. It's a wonderful thing for us to share. It is a wonderful thing to come, to sit, to listen, to go, to think. All of those things are great. And it probably will have very good benefits for us as individuals. But the fact of the matter is this: the Theosophical Society, this movement that we all have affiliated ourselves with, perhaps for different reasons, but always with the very clear understanding put before us that this is not just about being able to develop personally so that we can live the life at the beach. Personal happiness is wonderful and it's necessary. But we live in a world, and for whatever reason, all of us who are here were born at a time when the world has taken a very particular sort of turn, when there is a particular sort of energy of separateness that has become quite dominant in our surroundings. And what to do? Obviously, as individuals, we find the sense of being rather small, rather powerless perhaps. But this practice, I started off at the opening, sharing with you the very wise statement of Dr. Albert Schweitzer that example is not the main way to influence others. It is the only way. In the absence of an applied theosophy that bears fruit, then it's just a study, a nice one. Obviously it's one that you will never be able to surpass. You could stick with it a long time and enjoy yourself. But quite frankly, that's not good enough. So this sort of cultivation, the advice was from HPB not just to center yourself in the heart, but to listen for the promptings of the spiritual consciousness that is ever whispering. There's not a moment where it is not whispering. Equally, there is hardly a moment when we are not blocking it with a noise. The sun's always shining, but sometimes there are clouds of our creation. So that's what's before us. That's the hope. That's the direction of this organization, and the hope for this organization, and the hope for this world. So I just wanted to share those thoughts with you. I'm very happy that not too many of you fell asleep on me. But if you did, you heard it anyway. So thank you. Once again, thank you all.
Thank you very much, Tim, for a very learned talk, which will, I'm sure, benefit us all. And as you said, I think we will be carrying with us a lot of the things that you have said. Thank you very much. Good night. This session is closed.